So let's get to our conversation for this hour, which is around sexual abuse against children. Jano, who's our guest?
Our guest is Deline Adhiambo. Hope I've said her name right, a clinical psychologist. She'll speak to us in just a few moments. It's obviously a heavy subject. There's, one can even say we need to put trigger warnings, but it's a very important discussion to have. Yep. And just before we invite Deline to just share her thoughts, today's quote is by Amanda Gorman. She's a poet, she's an author, and one of the most youngest recognized poets and authors. She said this during the US presidential inauguration in 2021. She said, "There is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it." Does that ring true for you?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, there's always light, even though you sometimes face some really dark conversations yourself, right, in the work you do. What is child sexual abuse? Let's start there because it's important to get a definition of what that includes, so to speak. You can let us know.
Well, thank you, Janet. I think that's a very good starting point, just getting to know what child sexual abuse is. I mean, this is a term that we interact with every other day, but for most of us who don't know it, or for some of us, then child sexual abuse denotes any sexual activity to a child or a minor that involves touching or untouching. So then we're talking about things like, of course, pornography issues, we're talking about grooming, we are talking about, of course, the actual sexual act. So anything that denotes touching or untouching to a child, then that can constitute to child sexual abuse.
And many of these cases tend to happen to a child by somebody who is known to them. Why do you think this is still so widespread?
One, you realize that most of these perpetrators are known to the child, right? And because children are very trusting, and of course most people who are known to the child, we're talking about family members, we're talking about neighbors, we're talking about teachers, uncles, fathers. There's a level of trust that these children have on these people. I mean, they look at them as sources of influence. They look at them in terms of protection, in terms of care. However, it's easy to just take advantage of that trust, and so at the end of the day, it leads to betrayal. Not only confusion for the child, but it leads to the ultimate betrayal.
The thing that is perhaps the most worrying is how many cases of child sex abuse are reported versus how many go unreported. And the numbers are really scary, but just give us an outlook of what the numbers are in Kenya and what is probably unreported, that gets lost in all the noise.
Well, maybe we can look at the global front first. I mean, 1 in every 5 women and 1 in every 7 men have been sexually abused at some point in their childhood, And particularly in Kenya, we're looking at least 16%, of girls and 6 to 7% of men who've experienced some form of abuse, especially at the age of 18 to 24 years. So you realize these are big numbers for sure, and these are only issues, these are only cases that we see have been reported by organizations like the World Health Organization. Looking at the statistics by UNICEF and the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, I was looking at a 2019-2020 report, and they're talking about 7% of children having their images shared online and their videos, and these are children, of course, below the age of 15 years. 16% of this also constitute girls, 7% constitute men. So these are only the numbers that have reached the media, or probably that have reached the news desk. So I would imagine there is a case where there are so many of these cases that have gone unreported for sure.
Wow. Yeah. We also see it's part of the reason this conversation came up is we've seen the reports that came out around sexual abuse in schools, right, recently, one of the high schools. And then you begin to realize how widespread it is. I think the Teacher Service Commission even issued a report that said most of the teachers who have, committed a crime, I believe, I'm paraphrasing, it was sexual abuse. A lot of them were male teachers. What do you know about the scale of sexual abuse in schools and the barriers to knowledge, around it, reporting, and convictions? Just paint us a picture.
Well, we're seeing an increasing number of, sexual abuse cases, and it's unfortunate the institutions that are meant to, serve as oversight, especially for the schools, and when it comes to, controlling some of these issues or prevention, are the same areas where we get to hear these cases. And looking at that, of course, there's still a gap when it comes to, child sexual abuse. But I would imagine also, especially for the schools, having, being in a school, of course, there's that notion that schools, should protect children. But then again, when these perpetrators are in the same institutions, and of course it starts with, grooming, and unfortunately we're looking at children who are vulnerable in these cases. We're looking at children who are economically disadvantaged. These are some of the vulnerable populations. We're looking at also children who are disabled, and so these are some of the I would say, vulnerable populations when it comes to children. So they are easier targets as far as, the perpetrator profiles are concerned.
I want to switch to now the profile of, perpetrators. Right. And in what spaces, and I don't know if we have data for Kenya, but globally, I know research has been done. In what spaces do perpetrators most likely, kind of camouflage themselves in, so that people can be more aware of what to look out for? And what are some signs actually as well that, this is not someone who should be around children?
Right. It's very interesting, Mariam, because one, most perpetrators are people who are known to children. Most perpetrators are people who are known to children. And this is a systemic issue. It starts from right at home or right where the children, there's that level of trust, right? So even looking at the patterns when it comes to the perpetrator profiles, we're looking at, just circling back to that, people who are known to the children or to the child, people who the child trusts. But then again, and particularly right now, we're looking at a situation, schools are closing, and so where does that leave us even when it comes to this conversation? Children are traveling alone, of course, so they also become easier targets. Things like also online grooming, digital exposure. So who is responsible in this case, right? So when it comes to identifying these perpetrators, then they don't have a face, really. They're just people who are known to the children. And of course, there's a lot of manipulation that is involved, especially not only for the child, but also for the family of the child. And looking at, as I had mentioned, the most vulnerable, they tend to target, children who either lack knowledge, especially when it comes to boundary, but also the aspect of power imbalance. Children look at adults for, protection, for care, but when that trust is violated, then it not only causes confusion to the child, so we're looking at also things like lack of sexual education, of course, which I think should be a very important subject, and not only sexual education, but comprehensive sexual education. And sometimes the reason this doesn't happen because culture also plays a role. There are certain cultures where this is a taboo subject, reporting, silencing of these victims, silencing of their families. So there's really a lot to look at, when it comes to that. Talking about the signs, I would imagine you're asking how can you tell a child has been sexually violated? There's different aspects. We can look at the physical signs, we can look at the behavioral signs, as well as emotional or the psychological signs. So some of the signs to look out for when it comes to the physical aspects, of course, one, unexplained injuries, especially on the genital areas. We're looking at things like blood-stained clothes. Teenage pregnancies, this is a great indicator because teenage pregnancies are one of the consequences that result from child sexual abuse. We're also looking at, when it comes to behavioral aspects, this child can tend to become withdrawn. They can start isolating themselves. All of a sudden, they can start struggling with emotional regulation issues, anger outbursts. Sometimes they can start avoiding places or certain people. looking at it from a psychological front or an emotional front, then a lot of depression also, anxiety. And with depression particularly, a cause for concern could be when the child, of course, has very low self-esteem, there's a sense of hopelessness, suicidality in extreme cases, or even attempted suicide. So these are some of the things to look out for, especially when it comes to the signs.
Just before Eric asks, I had 2 follow-ups. One, that's identifying the signs of sexual abuse, but from a preventative point, it's what level of sex education can we give to young children to perhaps help prevent this? Because like you said, a lot of it happens in situations where people are known and trusted. So perhaps what sex, and I know people panic when they hear sex education for children, but it's so necessary. Maybe you can give us that. And then maybe also, and I know it's hard, like you said, they have no face, but are there any red flags that someone could potentially be a defiler or, a perpetrator or a sexual abuser? That's, I'm just thinking,
Okay. When it comes to the preventative measures, right?
The sex education.
The sex education aspect, I think first and foremost, we need to normalize these conversations. Many a times we're seeing cultures that, stigmatize these kinds of conversations. It is a taboo to talk about. So that is one of the biggest perpetrators, So it starts by normalizing conversations around sexual abuse. Then also age-appropriate sex education and comprehensive sex education, also very, very important. Another preventative aspect is also just investing in child protection agencies, funding there. That is also another area that is of utmost importance. Also increasing special children courts, I think, especially from a legal front, that would be an interesting aspect. But also just inter-organizational coordination, because you see cases go reported, however, just sometimes there is a lapse between probably the legal agencies and the NGOs and also the medical agencies. So if there could be some sort of smooth flow rather, when it comes to inter-organizational, coordination and communication, I think that would make it very easy. But also community supports programs, a lot of awareness programs can go a long way when it comes to preventing these issues.
We'll get back to the what sex education is age appropriate for kids at what age, but I know Eric and Janet had questions. Eric?
You can follow up on that one actually, because I remember when Susan Kiheka was in the Senate, she had proposed, just the reintroduction. It's been a number of times of bringing back, a bill to talk about sex education. Of course, it was fought by very many stakeholders and so on. But to address some of these questions and concerns, what would that be? The appropriate age and the appropriate information that goes with, because you can have sex education, but it's not all sex education that's the same to everyone. It's just like, you don't introduce the children to biology
all at once.
So what appropriate ages would be would be good for what information?
Okay.
Even as a parent, you're teaching a child.
That's a very interesting, way to look at it. However, you realize children at different, developmental stages, they have different needs. But then again, at what point does a child start getting aware of the environment? Most of the time at age 3, they start interacting with the environment, they get to know or differentiate, right and wrong. So I would say at age 3 would be a good place to start that conversation. And particularly at this age, I teach them about, issues to do with touch, teach them boundaries, to say no. I know on social media we see a lot of, parents worldwide teaching kids, or, don't agree to be touched here. So at
these
age
are my
3,
private parts.
Absolutely. Even
it's as simple as a song,
right. So at age 3, I would say a child has started developing, there's that awareness in their environment, and there's that distinction to be able to know, what is right and what is wrong. So that is a very good place to start. Of course, as they go up the ladder, also their needs change. They interact with different people, and I would imagine also even their capacity, grows. So as we go then, also the caregivers just being equipped with skills to understand their children's needs. We normally say, as your child's needs grow, are you also growing? You know, because as your child grows, their needs also grow, and so that means you also need to adjust to be able to accommodate their needs as they grow.
I remember first asking that question many years ago, and the answer that was given was 3 or 4, and people gasped. They were like, no, how am I talking to a toddler? But then over time you realize, to your point, Deline, that it's about, you know, making it age appropriate, because they're beginning to understand.
Right.
But I don't know if that still holds true. 3, 4, 5. 3, 3, 4,
Like you
thereabout.
said, three is a good beginning. But also, you know, we look at it from how our own understanding of sex,
Education,
right?
true.
It's the same thing we talk about music. Nowadays, you listen to songs and you're like, yeah. These were the lyrics to that song, and I was just bopping. And you had you were completely innocent to it. So it's the understanding is different in different age groups. I wanted to ask about the psychology or the defects of the person who molests a child, especially when we see those gruesome cases of somebody who's molesting a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a several months old child. What is it about such people? Are they wired this way? What causes someone to defile a child?
Okay. There are different ways we can look at it, Eric. However, there is no excuse for defiling a child. You know, children are very trusting. I know we like saying children are naive, but children are very trusting. And that's why, unfortunately, sometimes, you know, they succumb or they end up suffering things like sexual abuse. However, with the perpetrators, we said, you know, they don't have a face. However, issues of, you know, power imbalance also. These perpetrators tend to go for people they deem vulnerable, you know, people who they know will not retaliate. I would imagine some of them possibly could be battling maybe personality issues or other mental health issues. However, I think that conversation, you know, calls for other different measures, right? So I would look at it from definitely a vulnerability point of view, power imbalance and whatnot, and also...
Yeah, but there's something more. I mean, power imbalance, there's absolutely no question about power between somebody who is in their 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s with somebody who is 3 years old. So what else? And I'm asking you because you're a psychologist, right? What is this that, what is it that is common among these people? Has there been any study to establish this kind of people are predisposed to having these kind of tendencies of molesting children, of defiling children?
Okay. Some of these people, you realize also sometimes the culture or the environment they're in has normalized these issues, you know? And so it's the fact that it's been normalized, then it's not a big deal. However, as I had mentioned, Eric, some of these people sometimes, you know, tend to suffer from psychological issues, you know, for whatever reason. Some of these people also have just weird fetishes, if I can say that, you know. And also, their upbringing also could have sometimes predisposed them, you know, to some of these issues. And so there's a lot that is involved. It could be maybe early exposure. It could be also other environmental factors, compounded with also, I would say, psychological issues, you know. However, at the end of the day, then, when it gets to that point, then, I mean, there is no excuse.
No, it's not about the excuse, by the way. Yeah?
It's happening.
It's not about the excuse, Deline. We need to be able to identify the factors and the patterns. Right? Is there any study that has been conducted in this country? And even Janet, I know you've been in this field for a while, and Mariam, have you come across any information that, or specific study that has tried to understand what is this that would make somebody do this? What do they have? Is there something that is common, a common thread that emerges out of this? So then we can say that based on this, then there are measures that would help reduce the exposure or the predisposition to this, so that we reduce the number of people who actually end up defiling children. There'll be no excuse. We can jail everyone who's doing this, and we should. But what is it that is causing?
It's getting us there.
Yeah.
Like our victims of abuse in their childhood more likely to become perpetrators in their in their adulthood.
That can be a predisposing issue. I have not interacted with a conclusive study. We see a lot of studies, of course, happening and trying to understand. And some of these countries, we also see, unfortunately, situations where they want to, label child abuse issues as, kind of a gender orientation. And you realize some of these cultures are what I would say perpetuate these things. However, there's no conclusive study that has, particularly established that these people ultimately behave this way. It's still an ongoing thing. We're still trying to understand the dynamics around that. And particularly for Kenya, that's still a very, very green area. It's an area that, of course, calls for a lot of research still. Okay, so it's not I would say an explicitly clear aspect when it comes to what exactly leads these people or the perpetrators to actually abuse children.
It's wildly heartbreaking when you understand how much research is underfunded. And I'm like, by this time, and you'll hear what you've just said is what I also heard in rooms. I've heard in rooms over the years. We're still trying to do conclusive study. And I remember saying, we're going to have to confront this underlying vulgarity and fetishization of children. It's a highly controversial and difficult conversation, but there's places, even in this country, reports in areas around, say, the coast or counties like Busia, and this is documented, where the levels of child abuse and sometimes notably very young children is extremely high. So there's patterns happening. I think sometimes also one of the lawyers, one of the people in the justice system who had to leave one of those counties, she was compromised a lot because perpetrators were protected a lot, and some of them were high profile. So it's one of the most, it's almost like one of those studies that should be a non-negotiable, because to Eric's point, as uncomfortable as it is, unless those things are unpacked, unless we know what the patterns are and everything. But right now, a big one is perpetrators are protected.
Right.
Some perpetrators are actually known to the public, and some counties have higher prevalence than others. But where is the resourcing to fund that? Because that should be prioritized, and then people will understand.
It's even just being honest about things.
Yeah,
for example,
that's another one.
We discuss our teen pregnancy rates quite often, but I don't think it clicks when you say teen pregnancy, that almost all the time is as a result of defilement, and it's very problematic. I know there are Romeo and Juliet cases which do happen, but I think a lot of the times it's often a case of defilement. So then the fact that we're not even looking at it from a red flag problem, it's just, Kilifi County has a big teen pregnancy issue. What does that mean when you go back to
And sometimes the context is also how much abuse of children was shrouded in child marriage. You know what I mean? So there's almost a normalization that even when she's 10, as long as she's menstruating, I can marry her.
That's true.
So it's a lot of those nuanced things that also you find some perpetrators are like, I don't see a problem because my great-great-great-grandfather married somebody who was 10.
Right.
So imagine bringing all those factors into play. You realize then that there's a much bigger issue at hand. Yeah.
I don't know then where to attack it from. I'm trying to think, Deline, where do we start from a societal perspective? Because by the time the law is taking charge, it's already too late, unfortunately. Something has already happened, or there was a threat of something to happen. But from a societal perspective, how do we protect children and prevent these cases?
Okay, it starts by, of course, having a conversation and listening to your children. Listen to your children and act. Unfortunately, many times, we want to imagine that just because they are children, sometimes they don't know what they're saying. However, it's important to listen to your children and take act. We say you'd rather overreact than underreact. Especially when a child has reported, a case. But also just being very vigilant, talking to your children, training them, on the importance of even body autonomy. So it starts from not only at home, but at the very basic level, so that by the time we're even engaging in things like the society and the media, then just some of these preventative measures, as I had mentioned, of course, it starts by from a very young age. Teaching the children body autonomy, teaching them boundaries, that comprehensive sex education, as long as it's comprehensive. Then on issues now that are out of our control now, when probably the child goes out there, then the conversation now goes further to the teachers, to the society, maybe to the media, and the role for different people, is involved. But I'd say it definitely starts at the very, very basic level.
There's something here it's from 2019, but it's Kenya Violence Against Children Survey. Among teens aged 13 to 17, 11% of girls and 4% of boys reported experiencing sexual abuse in schools. Over 32% of girls and 18% of boys had experienced some form of child sexual abuse. They were 18% and 32% aged 18 to 24, but they'd experienced some form of child sexual abuse before the age of 18 across all settings. School locations accounted for a meaningful share, 21.4% of girls and 20.3% of boys reporting their first incident of sexual abuse occurred at school. So it's almost 50-50, yeah? It's almost like the equal number. So I think I'm reading this to also speak to the fact that what I've anecdotally, what you also hear is when it comes to boys who are maybe in high school, there's a lot of pressure around the first sexual encounter, but it's child abuse. They're 14, they're 15. Then it's underreported, and then the trauma is perpetuated. I think recently, even though this particular person apologized, there was an incident where it was somebody who was significantly older than the boys, but she was cajoling them, flirting with them, and making sexual remarks. What was good is that the public pushed back and said, you absolutely do not get to do that. But this whole thing just shows you it's comprehensive sex education, it's culture, it's law, but it's like the subliminal normalization of sex.
That's very, very true. I think let's start from being honest. I genuinely think, and it speaks to what Deline is saying, that we need to start with being honest with what is going on. That's what is the age, for example, of first sexual contact for a lot of young people. If we're not honest about that, we continue to bury our heads under the sand, then that's how we proliferate this problem. Then what sex education are we giving? Like she said again, it needs to be age appropriate, comprehensive, and data will show you from across the world that where sex education is the most comprehensive, access to even contraceptives is the most open and things like that, and to reproductive health is free and open, that's where you see the lowest rates of teenage pregnancy, you see the lowest rates, the highest ages of sexual debut. People are having sex a lot later in life, and also the rates of course, some cases of defilement are much lower. So that tells you that the information is where you start. But we have an allergy to information. We don't like to, because people will fight. Deline, I know she knows, and we will fight. Same thing that Eric was speaking to. Whenever a bill is introduced to have sexual education become part of the curriculum, there's pushback because we want to pretend we are a godly nation.
And adding to what you've said is the protection, quote unquote, in a sense, of perpetrators. Nobody wants to admit that. Protection is a big word, but there's little justice. Some cases we can see that. But if you see a pattern, it also means that there's not acceptance, but it's not pushed back on. The law doesn't come into play. So somebody will say, I suppose I can get away with this. But yeah, Eric.
So let me ruffle the feathers a little bit. Just the same way I talk about our battle for FGM. So we have laws, we have all these things, but maybe the law is not the appropriate entry point. Because when you bring in law, you bring in consequences, you bring in punishment, and that conversation ends there. Because it means that you're saying that if you continue doing this, tomorrow you'll be in jail. So then I'm not going to tell you that I've been doing it. I'm not going to tell you when I want to do it. We're just going to end that conversation at that point. Maybe it's the same thing. For example, is there an appropriate age for sex debut? Is there any age where you can say, now this one, we have all as a society agreed that don't get into debut of age, because a majority of children are doing it in their teenage years, and we're saying it's wrong. So what's right?
Right.
Is there an age that we are
if you can consent, it's right.
So who says that?
Because children can't consent.
So who says that? So when you just turn 18,
nothing magical happens, but you do need to draw a line
so
somewhere.
when you turn 18, yesterday you were 17, today is your 18th birthday, because also we know that very many children look forward to their 18th birthday so that they can then do all these things. Does that mean that that's then the appropriate age, just because the age has come?
No.
Therefore it's appropriate.
It's because you need to draw the line somewhere, right?
Okay.
And I do agree, nothing magical
But
will
what
happen.
informs it? That's what I'm asking.
What informs
For us to say that this is the appropriate age for sexual debut in this country, as we have the conversation that we just said, and it's right, that let's face our truths, that very many people got into sex before they were 18.
Yes.
Very many people have gotten into sex before they were 18. In very many cases, you ask them, they were consenting. Legally, they are not allowed to consent, but they were looking forward to it. Physiologically, the body was telling them to do it. The hormones were telling them to do it, and everything, and they were looking forward to doing it. They were doing it. So, and they're saying, no, it's not appropriate. Do we have that appropriateness? The reason why I'm asking all this is to say, probably you should approach this from a different angle. Yes, we have a law to guide, a law to set the standard, a law to say that you cross thresholds, you shall do this. The same way we are saying, maybe we should have a law that just allows for introduction of sex education, but we don't necessarily need a law to introduce sex education. Can we have a conversation within the society, and then the society sits and accepts that this is how we shall raise our children, this is the information we shall give to our children, this is how we shall protect our children. If we do that, then we don't have to look at it from law, because I think law is a problem.
How is law a problem, Eric? I think
here's how I think law is a problem.
My pushback.
I'll answer by just talking about what Jano was raising. So this thing we're calling protection, okay? We talk about, let's teach our children these are my private parts and so on and so forth. But we are not saying this is how you shall report. We don't have a proper way of saying that this is how you shall report. If you feel that somebody has crossed the barrier, come and tell me, and then when you tell me this is what I shall do with that information. We don't have that line.
Do we not?
Tell me what the line is.
Okay, this is my assumption that this sex education also and maybe Deline and Janet can correct me, it also tells, when you're telling a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, these are my private parts, no one touches them, you also, if someone tries, you come and tell me.
Yes, and then when I tell you?
Then that is for me to go to the nearest police station.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay. That's why I'm saying that's where the problem comes in. Because we are saying that when it has been reported to this adult, then the adult takes this direct route. And why we are seeing the challenges that we are facing is that the adults are not taking that direct route. Many cases, people do not report. People will sit on it for a while. People will try to figure out, how do I address this? Because there are so many other factors at play. The person who's been reported is my brother. The person who's been reported is my elder son. The person is my cousin who's living here. How do I deal with this? If I report it, I know from that point how it goes. Or I go and report it because at that point I'm hot, right? I'm mad. And then we start having these conversations, and then it dawns on me, okay, this is what I'm saying. Just looking at it from that straitjacket view of the law is a barrier already. It is showing to us that there are barriers here that we need to think about. How do we break these barriers so that the community is the one that is actually enforcing the law, not a third party enforcing a law.
The third party here being the police. I see what you mean. I think that again is a it's an information deficit. It's a culture shift that needs to happen as well, because it's what Jano was saying, there's a lot of protection, and those are the factors that play into that. You don't, it's your brother, it's your uncle, it's a cousin, it's the person you know, it's someone paying school fees, it's someone who's political or a big honcho, whatever, all those things, but they should not matter at the end of the day. So the thing is, how do you get the community to buy in? And it's an information thing.
To understand that at that point, and I know Deline will come in, but I think the environment, I think Mariam has put it, isn't enabling. First of all, it's an information thing. And then it's two-pronged. Number one, information, or knowing that it's the wrong thing has happened, but knowing that you'll be persecuted for reporting it, because whether you push back, some people have been known to go to, say, brother and uncle and be like, what did you do to so-and-so? What did you do to my son, to my daughter? And then the family is divided, right? So she has to choose if it's the mom. And this has been documented countless times in court. She has to choose whether she's going to be cut off from her family, or whether she's going to protect her child and move on. Then the re-traumatization is going to the police, and the police saying, "Simuonge, mwelewane." So those are barriers to justice, which are true, which hold true every day. I don't think it's a case of this is the channel, this is the channel. It's knowing that I will be persecuted sometimes for bringing this up. So what powers protect me? Deline, please step in and weigh in on some of what you've heard.
Okay, Eric, I hear where you're coming from when you talk about that. But before we even, talk about the law enforcement, we talk about child sexual abuse as systemic. I mean, this is not a new conversation, right? This is not something that we are talking about for the first time. These are patterns that we've been seeing generations after generations, right? However, you realize when you look at it from that front, then many times when these cases come out, for instance, if a child tells, the parent or the caregiver, there's this and this happened, because of the kind of, protection that we're even talking about, it's easier to deal with one person or one family, unfortunately, so that the family name is not on the line, or the clan name is not on the line. And particularly in the case where, the perpetrator is an influential person, we tend to lay very low. So we'd rather just deal with it out of, court, out of whatever, to protect the family law. And you see, this is something that we have to unlearn. It is not something that has started now. It is something that has been happening, and it circles back to the root issues. It circles back to uko chini kabisa, in terms of looking at it from that front. And so, what are some of the things that we can do to try and take control of the situation in that regard? Right? It starts by having these conversations. It starts by normalizing these conversations. Fortunately or unfortunately, it has to happen. And I mean, I don't imagine there's one person who, will do it, right? So we have to have these conversations. And the more we talk about them, including what we are actually doing today, the more we are normalizing the conversation, the more we are making it known that it is okay to have these conversations. So that by the time we're even getting to the legal enforcement, then at the community level, at the family level, then there's that sense of safe space. We also need to create a safe space to talk about these conversations, especially at the grassroots. So the children need to know that when they talk about these things, then they will not be punished. But you see, the kind of silencing that goes on, the kind of threats that goes on, the kind of manipulation, we've seen children being threatened. If you report, I'll wipe off your family. If you report, this is what is going to happen to you. And so it perpetuates the silence culture, not only for these children, but also for their families and their caregivers involved.
There's one basic factor that a child, many parents, because we know also there are parents who abuse their children. But many parents, by and large, and this is by a vast majority, will want to protect their children. That many parents, if they got to hear any wind that their child is being violated, they would get very angry about it. Okay, and this, we have many parents in our society. Even the adults are just all parents. What I'm trying to say is that we ought to probably take a pause in the way we are just approaching this thing and acknowledge, just like we're saying, let's face our reality. Our reality is that yes, we have law, but this law is not performing the way it should. A law makes sense when the society accepts the law and uses the law. Now, this law is not completely in tandem with how we are socialized, right? There's a way in which communities have traditionally dealt with issues in the community. Some not so well, and then they need reinforcement by adding new needs, but then there's always something. There's always a way in which we deal with our children, we raise our children, so societies raise their children communally. So what is it that they would do when a child is a victim? Is there any conversation that we've had and looked at? So what has worked? What worked before the law? And then here is the law.
Yeah.
And what can we borrow? I'll give you an example. We have gone in this country and, come up with this, let's go to church, let's get married, let's go to the Catholic, let's get married. And then people realize, okay, but we still, in all those things, even if we'll go to church, we still want to do this traditional thing. We still want to do whatever, right? We brought it into our law and said, we acknowledge this. Can we start looking at these things that have worked in society and say, let's bring it also on board and use them to enhance how we police ourselves?
I don't know how much of a difference that would make, because I think it's community and law coming together. I'm sure people have explored it. I'm sure people have probably said, because when people do community engagement, and Deline can speak to this, sometimes it means also trying to learn from communities and say, in this particular setting or in your culture, how were you able to? And some will come back and say, we speak to men and women that you do not get to be the person who is a danger to children. Because also we put so much burden on children. And I'm like, you're putting the burden on the child because we do more of reaction than prevention, which is one of the biggest barriers.
True.
But I'm sure people have gone and said, and they'll say, yeah, in our culture, either tunamfunga or I don't know. I'm sure, I can't speak specifically, but I don't think studies are devoid of understanding what cultures did. I think the biggest
been incorporated. Studying is one thing.
Incorporating is a different
one.
I'm
how much of this are we incorporating? So, for example, let's just look at, so a case is reported to court, and then families go to court to say, let's withdraw this, let's deal with it. All right? What do? We go back and say, nah, you see that family is protecting the perpetrator and so on and so forth. But what lesson are we learning from this? When they were withdrawing it, were they saying, let's withdraw it and forget it and move on? Or were they saying, let's address the issue?
So I don't know.
How are those issues to be addressed?
How are they?
There are different cases, there are different stages. There's defiling a 3-year-old. There's, defiling a teenager. There's 2 teenagers engaging in sex. All these things from the entire spectrum.
Let's take out the Romeo and Juliet aspect, honestly. Let's take out those cases of when it's 2 under, 2 minors.
Because they're children who have actually ended up in jail and come out many months later.
And we had that conversation, and it was, if it's 2 underage, then that's a Romeo and Juliet case, and there's no criminal case. We discussed that here.
There's no law in this country that makes it Romeo and Juliet. It's been going on in the AG's office on how to make sure that then we take at Romeo and Juliet cases separately. Okay. It's not there.
The Lord is sorry. But there's so much. There's so much to dig into.
How do we bring in other ways? This one way. The truth is, children are engaging in sex. Children are having sex with older people. People are molesting and defiling children. Okay, we have had laws, we have laws in place. What's our way forward?
Children having sex with other people is defilement.
Yes, okay.
But I don't know whether Deline can react to what she knows, but yeah.
And to what Eric is saying, I don't know, there's just something about I don't know if this is the place for alternative dispute resolution, to be quite honest. I'll be honest, from a policing perspective, we need to get back to the way community worked. I think just from a, keeping each other safe. But once it has happened, I think from that point on, we just need, it's the law as is. I don't think there should be much room for that, because I think back and I think of the cases of communities that within their alternative dispute resolution systems will say, oh, your daughter was defiled, here's 50 goats. And it doesn't work for now. It may have worked then, it doesn't work for now.
Because what does it do for her trauma?
Right.
It's never,
and we need to be honest about what worked then might not work now. But have we fully explored how it worked? No, that's a fair point from Eric. But please go in.
Okay. I think the fact that we're even having this conversation is evident that there is a gap. There is a gap, and it calls for every stakeholder, to go back to the drawing board, right? And just look at what is working and what is not working. Eric, you mentioned something, about even, the community level. If we are trying to, even say initiate community support programs, for sure, it's important to go at the level of these communities, right? Find out what has been working and what is not working. But realize also we're living in very different times. We're living in the digital age. There's new information. Things are changing. Some of these practices are no longer, are being phased out, right? So it also starts by sensitizing these communities, right? And letting them know, okay, so we understand, or probably this is what your culture has been doing, or this is what has been happening. However, this has been detrimental in this and this way. So sensitization is very important, but also involving the communities, even if it means, translating the programs to whatever language works for them, the basics that works for them. What is it that at community level they can be involved in? So that by the time when we start from there, then you realize as we go, up the ladder, then things are changing. But that's very, it's very interesting in the sense that that is a gap that, of course, even the research, organizations need to look at. So different stakeholders can look at it, from different points of view. But definitely, I would say that is a gap that is worth exploring and just looking at it from different aspects.
Okay. I'm trying to see if you've had any experience with anything that you've seen where just one case that made you realize there was an issue that happened. As a counselor, you intervened and counseled this child. Speak to the family, whether the family was nervous about it, whether the family wanted to pursue justice. I just want to understand also what you faced, because that could give us an idea of, qua ground, how exactly do people approach when something like this happens to their child?
Okay, so definitely when it comes to the reporting channels, so the abuse has happened. So where do we start, right? Or where do we go first, right? Of course, I would say the first point of contact definitely will be, the assessment, assess for safety and protection first. Remove this child from the source of danger, right? I have seen cases where a parent has come or has brought a child to therapy, and the child or the parent says, this child has been withdrawn, but then again, when you probe further with the child alone, then the child tells you that, oh, it's actually this particular caregiver who did this to me, right? Then in that case, you see, for me now as a psychologist, then it means assessing for danger and protection, right? And in this case, so what are the right channels to follow? First, of course, before we even get to now the reporting, there's the protection and assessment, then there's the medical aspect, So, of course, now as we continue with now, dealing with this issues that arise, then of course following or initiating now the legal process, right? But in that case, definitely the law takes precedence, because you have to remove this child from that kind of environment. If it means taking the child to, to the recovery centers or to the hospital or any area that definitely the child would be safe, that will be the course of action.
Or a safe house. Sorry, we have to pause there because I know we are almost completely out of time. Kimani Gashuki says, too many children are suffering in silence while those in power protect the abusers. A good example is what happened in Alliance. No title or position should shield a predator. Then he's put a hashtag, protect our children. Then there's Lena, Eric, and Teresa who are greeting you, Deline. Somebody's saying she's your classmate, Teresa Weru. Then Debbie says, no, Bakari asks, what's the best way to protect children while accessing the internet or social media? I think we'll come back and have that conversation. It's a broad, loaded conversation. It's uncomfortable, but it's very necessary. Thank you for weighing in. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Deline. Again, from a policy perspective, because I think there's a couple of things that have just, come as red flags from this conversation. But we'll be ending the show now. There's a lot to look forward to. Don't worry. We have, of course, Your World coming up on NTV, and on Nation FM we'll have Claudia Naisabwa and Brian Aseli. I'm trying to see what the girls are doing today, but Tatujui, it's a surprise today. It's a surprise. Tomorrow is Thor's Day, as we like to say. Thor. Hammer God. So we look forward to having some amazing conversations with you, 6 to 10 a.m. every Monday to Friday. We'll be here on YouTube, on Instagram, on Facebook, on NTV, on Nation FM, Kila Mahali. Sindio? Tupatane kesho asubuhi.
See you.